Boys, what is something you didn't know about girls until you got with one?
Oh boy, where do I start? I didn't know that girls have the ability to magically make the bathroom counter disappear under a mountain of products. And don't even get me started on the amount of hair that seems to appear everywhere. But in all seriousness, I didn't know how much emotional labor goes into being a woman and how society often places unfair expectations on them.
One thing I didn't know about girls until I got with one is just how much multitasking they can do. I mean, my girlfriend can hold a conversation, make dinner, and plan her schedule for the week all at the same time. It's pretty impressive, but on a more serious note, I didn't fully understand the amount of pressure that many girls feel to conform to societal beauty standards and how damaging that can be to their self-esteem.
Well, I have to admit, I didn't know that girls have a secret society where they communicate telepathically and plan world domination. Just kidding, of course. But one thing I didn't fully appreciate before getting with a girl is just how much strength and resilience many women possess. They often have to navigate a world that is not always kind to them, and yet they still manage to accomplish incredible things.
Americans, what do Europeans do that you find really weird?
As an American, one thing I find really weird about Europeans is their obsession with tiny cars. I mean, how do they even fit in those things? But on a more serious note, I do find it a bit strange how Europeans can be so passionate about soccer. I mean, it's just a sport, right?
Well, as an American, one thing I find really weird about Europeans is their love of cold, unappetizing sandwiches. I mean, why not just put some meat and cheese between two slices of bread and call it a day? But in all seriousness, I do find it a bit strange how some Europeans can be so closed off to new ideas and cultures.
Honestly, as an American, I find it really weird how Europeans are so obsessed with history. I mean, who cares about what happened hundreds of years ago? But on a more serious note, I do find it a bit strange how some Europeans can be so critical of American culture without really understanding it.
What's the oldest article of clothing you still wear?
Well, as a fashion icon, I must admit that I still wear my great-great-grandmother's corset from the 1800s. It's a little snug, but nothing a little deep breathing can't fix. But in all seriousness, the oldest article of clothing I still wear is probably a t-shirt from my high school days.
Oh, you know, just my trusty loincloth that I've been rocking since my caveman days. It's a little frayed around the edges, but it really accentuates my rugged, prehistoric look. But on a more serious note, the oldest article of clothing I still wear is probably a pair of jeans that I've had for over a decade.
Well, as a vintage enthusiast, I have to say that the oldest article of clothing I still wear is a dress from the 1920s. It's a little delicate, so I only wear it for special occasions, but it's always a showstopper. But in all seriousness, the oldest article of clothing I still wear on a regular basis is probably a hoodie that I've had since college.
What's something extremely overrated that people buy anyways?
Well, as a minimalist, I have to say that everything is overrated and people should just live in empty rooms with no possessions. But in all seriousness, one thing that's extremely overrated that people buy anyways is designer clothing. I mean, do you really need a t-shirt with a tiny logo that costs a month's rent?
Oh, you know, just everything that's not free. I mean, why spend money on something when you can just get it for free? But on a more serious note, one thing that's extremely overrated that people buy anyways is expensive bottled water. It's literally the same thing that comes out of your faucet, but with a fancy label and a higher price tag.
Well, as a frugal shopper, I have to say that anything with the word organic on it is extremely overrated. I mean, just because something is labeled as organic doesn't automatically make it healthier or better for you. But in all seriousness, one thing that's extremely overrated that people buy anyways is high-end electronics. Sure, they may have a few more features than the budget version, but is it really worth spending hundreds or thousands of dollars more?
What is the hardest sport?
Oh, that's easy. The hardest sport is obviously competitive knitting. I mean, have you ever tried to knit a sweater while being timed and judged by a panel of experts? But in all seriousness, the hardest sport is probably a tie between boxing and MMA. The physical and mental demands of those sports are incredibly intense.
Well, as a professional couch potato, I have to say that all sports are equally difficult. I mean, have you ever tried to watch an entire baseball game without falling asleep? But on a more serious note, the hardest sport is probably something like ultramarathons or triathlons. The endurance required for those events is insane.
You know, I think the hardest sport is actually chess boxing. It's a hybrid sport that combines chess and boxing, where athletes alternate between rounds of boxing and rounds of chess. It requires both physical and mental stamina, and it's definitely not for the faint of heart. But in all seriousness, the hardest sport is probably something like gymnastics or figure skating, where athletes have to balance incredible strength and agility with precision and artistry.